Topic is one of my favorites because I think screening is thankfully, not only an important part of any integrated tiered system, it's becoming more and more commonplace, meaning it is a more common practice in schools, which is a wonderful thing because it's allowing us an opportunity to not only look for kids at the first sign of concern, but it's giving teachers information they need to really do a great job of shaping instruction at tier one, looking at ways they can refine their own instructional strategies to maximize engagement and limit disruption. And it's really, really an important tool so that we can shape the daily happenings of instruction. Also, by looking at screening data, not only does it really help to inform instructional practices for students, it's very important for those that are in charge of professional learning, either self-guided, the choices we make for ourselves, or for those that are coordinating at the district level, because it allows you to know where you need to drive your professional learning effort. So thanks to everybody for being here. And again, as people come in and get settled, if you feel comfortable, please not only put your first and your last name, but also please turn on your camera so that we can see you. You're welcome to eat, drink, and be merry. Walk on a treadmill, do the things that you need to do. We're just happy to have you. So as many of you know, all of our work is grounded in comprehensive, integrated, three-tiered models of prevention. So this is one type of an integrated tiered systems of support. People often ask us what's the difference between this and traditional multi-tiered systems of support. And Wendy and I will tell you, it is a broadening of traditional multi-tiered systems of support. It is broadened to also address social and emotional well-being. It is also different in the sense that it is data informed in the building process. So many of you are aware there's actually a tool called the School-Wide Expectation Survey for specific settings that allows the adults to determine what every adult in the building thinks kids need to know to be successful in each of the key areas. And that's what gets built into the expectation matrix. And unlike some systems where the building process is rolled out, like the first year they do reading, then the next year they do math, and the next year they do behavior. And in this, you're building it all at one time so that we are building one integrated system and then working towards high fidelity implementation, knowing that you don't have to be perfect all the time. So when you think about Ci3T, let's keep in mind as we have these conversations about screening tonight that you are leveling the playing field by making sure that there's clarity on what is offered at tier one. So anything that you want taught, practiced, acknowledged, academically reinforced, like thinking about how you're going to teach reading, how you're going to teach math, how you're going to teach more advanced topics, how you're going to do advanced statistics, how are you going to teach physical education, all your district and state standards and high quality instruction expectations are clarified. And that center of it is positive behavior intervention and support. So just like the work you read from the National Center on Positive Behavior Interventions and Support, and PS, good news, they are fully funded as they move into the next year, which is a huge blessing, I will say. But in this approach, we want to make sure it is data informed. So it's not a guess as to what kids need to know. You've actually asked the adults. And then the last part of Ci3T is bringing in validated resources. And I know Elise and Rebecca and Wendy are going to go into more details on this tonight. But when we think about bringing in validated resources to make sure that we are building self-determined, lifelong learners, kids that know how to set goals, fail, succeed, define new objectives, self-regulate, manage anxious feelings. That's a big set of tasks. And we use the phrase social to capture all of that. But we can think about social and emotional well-being. That is the base of Ci3T. And I want to tell you, as people that have been doing systematic screening research for nearly 30 years, I cannot emphasize enough, we have to build what is the expected tier one efforts before we start screening. And we need to have a plan to intervene before you screen. Wendy and I, probably 15, 20 years ago, we used to do a lot of presenting and we would say initially have a plan to intervene before you screen. That doesn't mean you have to have every single tier two and every single tier three nailed down, but we at a minimum have to have clarity of what that tier one experience is. So that is the base experience that gets offered. And in this now enhanced set of resources, we have this whole suite of resources, which you're going to hear more about tonight, to kind of solidify how to do tier one well. So you've learned how to build it, you're learning how to implement it, and you're learning how to now look at the data to make sure that we know if tier one is in place and how well it's working. And no matter what a rock star you are at your school, There will absolutely be some kids that need more than tier one has to offer. And that is why God created tier two and tier three interventions. So now, as in each Pearson Ci3T implementation manual for schools and districts that have those, there's a research informed approach to what goes into tier one, as well as what's going to be the planned offerings at tier two and at tier three. And when you look at these grids, you're going to see there's a named support. And then it is not a person, it is what the person does. And then you're going to have a description, you're going to have entry criteria. And if you look at the entry criteria, this is where systematic screening comes into play. Because if we want to be confident that we are ensuring that each student that might benefit from this extra support is considered, we need to have systematic screening. I feel very confident we could probably find every kid that has externalizing behavior challenges, because the good news is they suit up, they show up, they're there every day, and they're almost never sick. But the kids that I truly worry about are kids with internalizing issues. So in addition to looking at academic data, we want to look at behavioral performance data. And then when you do anything extra for kids, there's three things we need to know. Is it happening? Treatment integrity. Before you start, we want to make sure that kids and adults, meaning teachers and family members, are okay with the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes. And then probably most familiar to many of us is progress monitoring to see how it's going. But without those three things, treatment integrity, sociability, and student performance data, we can't really know if it's happening and how it's working. And no matter how great it is, we need a plan to know when we should conclude it and start to fade it because it's been successful, or I need to step it up a notch and get to tier three supports like functional assessment-based intervention, which is near and dear to Elisa's heart. But collectively, this is the experience. And systematic screening are the data that give you the through line. So you need to be able to look at those data to see what tier one is looking like in terms of how kids are responding. And with that, we need to look at treatment integrity data, because you can't really know how kids are responding to something that if you're not sure if it is being implemented. None of us want to be the one to tell a family that their child needs more than tier one has to offer if we're not even confident that tier one is happening. So these concepts that we just talked about, sociability, treatment integrity, and universal screening, are all the core programmatic elements of Ci3T. So at tier one, once that base is designed, every year, twice a year, every fall and every spring, we ask every adult in the buildings, what do you think about what we're trying to accomplish in terms of the goals? How do you feel about these procedures? How well do you think this is working? Treatment integrity is looking at how is all that integrated approach being taught? How is it being practiced? How are data being used to make decisions about who might need more, just in the way we were talking about? So procedures for teaching, procedures for reinforcing. Remember, it's not just the students, but the adults as well. And then plans to use the data. And tonight we are here to focus mostly on behavior screening, which is less new to people, but still the newer of the two of academic screening. And as you look at these resources, you might notice that some of these have a different look and feel. And I want to give a special shout out to Amy Buffington and Catherine Johnson, who have spent literally hundreds of hours making sure these materials are refined to you and brought to you in a way that is fully ADA compliant. So tonight, as you get to hear these incredible women present this, you're going to hear from Elise and Rebecca and Wendy. They're going to mention many different modules. It's not to overwhelm you, but it's to make sure that you understand there's a base of support to guide your decisions around systematic screening, and know that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And again, if you've already registered to access these resources, no need to do it again. We've got it all set up for you. And this particular series, Project Empower Plus, this is all designed for faculty, staff, families, community members, administrators, Ci3T team members, people. Many of you are here tonight because you're pursuing additional understanding to help wherever you're supporting implementation. So you don't have to be in a Ci3T context to benefit from tonight's information. But if you have that opportunity to be in a place where there's integrated instruction, this could be good food for thought. And as you go through tonight, we're going to highlight some other professional learning opportunities that are coming down the way. So just to quickly clarify, the three things we're going to accomplish tonight are the following. We're going to do what we just did, give a quick overview of Ci3T and the role of systematic screening. Then we are going to go into more detail on how to use systematic screening at tier one to guide instruction there, and also help teachers to know when they and other adults in the building could benefit from pulling in some low intensity strategies. And then we'll talk about looking at data to connect students to additional supports. And as you keep hearing those terms, treatment integrity, looking at implementation, social validity, making sure that you're looking at what people think before they get started and again after, and really accurate methods of measurement. And then lastly, before we turn it over to the next person, if you are somebody that is new to the new tiered fidelity inventory measure, we want to make this connection for you. And a shout out to Carrie Brandon, who's here today. She's been somebody that's been working closely with the lease to make sure that these connections are made for you. So give me a thumbs up if anybody is using the new tiered fidelity version 3.0 coming out from the National Center for Positive Behavior Intervention Support. So you'll see that items 1.18 and 1.10 are looking at big ideas about using data to shape practices at tier one, and secondly, about classroom practices. So if you are interested in learning more, let us know. We'd be happy to connect you with that. So for today's agenda, I hope you feel welcomed, check. And I hope that you're excited to learn a little bit more about situating systematic screening and then how to use the data and then wrapping up at the end. Last thing before we turn it over, if you would like to follow along tonight, you can go to the tab that says professional learning. It's the tab that says PL, and you'll see a yellow box on the second drop down bar. And there you will find some of the most beautiful things right there on systematic screening. So if you open that up, you'll have access to exactly what we have for tonight. And very shortly, we will have that opportunity for you to also have a recording if there's pieces that you want to take back and share with other people.
All right, we're going to dig a little deeper now. And thanks to Kathleen for that awesome overview to kick us off. So as Kathleen said, we're going to jump into situating screening within Ci3T first. So Kathleen just showed you this slide. These are three key elements of data that we want to make sure are always collected and considered as part of Ci3T. And as she said, the first two are really about more about the adults, right? So the first one is goals, procedures, and outcomes. How do we feel about those to make sure we're on the right track and people actually are going to implement these practices? Treatment integrity tells us that if it's happening that Kathleen just talked about, and then we're going to dig deeper into the universal screening. That's really where our focus is tonight. Really what we're doing is when you're thinking about screening, you're going to make some decisions, right? The first thing is you want to make sure that you're selecting a tool that's both valid and reliable for the purposes that you are going to use it for. And so you want to make sure you understand the kind of information that you want about your students' age group, the amount of time it takes, cost, all of those things go into that decision making. But it's really critical that you don't um, that you take a tool and use it for its intended purposes and then don't tweak it, don't change it, don't change the scale, change the items and so forth, which we have seen people kind of want to do. So do your due diligence when you're choosing a screener that really fits with what your needs are. And then we're making sure, and we get this question, actually, Mark and I had this question yesterday, all students in your building are screened, right? So if they're in a special program, they're screened. If they show up, Kathleen says they don't get a paycheck, then they are part of the screening procedure. And that really is just an issue of making sure that we're not overlooking kids, we're not making assumptions about students, we're not excluding anyone who might need supports. Every single student is screened. Even if, and we've had this happen a lot, we have kids who are moving between schools quite a bit. You might have some kids that are transferring out of your district back into your district and so forth. If they have been there for the required time, which is generally about 30 days after the start of the school, you put them on the list if they're enrolled there and they are screened to the best knowledge that the teachers have for the information about that student at the time. Even if they left the day before, I'd keep them on there because that means if they're coming back or popping up at another school in your district, you already have that information. Behavior screening is different from academic screening in that you don't do it sort of as an intake when students come to your school. You're really doing it at those time points. Talking about the time points, we're going to conduct screening 3 times a year. So fall, winter, and spring. The fall data give us really important information for predicting end of year outcomes. So that fall time point is absolutely essential for kids. The winter screening allows us to adjust mid-year and make some corrections for kids as they come back for that second semester. And then in the spring, it helps us make sure that we have students in the appropriate classrooms, getting the appropriate structures right from the beginning of the year. So, benefits are making sure that we are shaping instruction. These are not assessment that are used to exclude students from any sort of opportunities at school. They are used for instructional purposes. We're making decisions about the appropriate strategies and structures and supports that we have in place. And we are using them across multiple tiers. So we engage with these data looking to inform tier one instruction, and that means both at the individual classroom level, some things you might be doing, but really looking at how our school as a whole is doing in terms of implementing and have the intended effects on student learning that we anticipate as again as a school. But we're also looking for opportunities to support teachers, and we're going to look at some data in just a minute. But we want to be able to support teachers by bringing in learning or relearning or bringing to the forefront some really low intensity strategies that are easy to implement in classrooms. They take relatively little time and they have a big effect on students in terms of increases in engagement, minimizing disruptions. And Rebecca's going to share more about those this evening. And then we also want to make sure that we're connecting students to available tier two and tier three supports that we have already identified in our building. We've already identified the criteria, so we use these data to make sure that we're connecting students very efficiently to those supports when they are needed. All right, so here is a resource when you're thinking about selecting a systematic screener. This in the PowerPoint, you'll be able to actually click on this PBIS infographic and it talks you through all of the pieces that you might want to consider as you're making this initial decision. And as part of the building process, so if your school is engaging in building CI3T models this year, you will you will be making the selection during this process. So you can see that session 3, it talks all about how we monitor the plan, meaning performance and outcomes. And so we will be hitting on all 3 of those: social validity, treatment integrity, and student screening during that time. And that's when you have this really important conversations and due diligence and selection. All right, we have lots of resources, so we're going to pepper these throughout. But if you visit our website and you click on the screening tab, there are, okay, I can't count this fast, but there are a number of screening tools that we've done a lot of work with as a team, and also that we know lots of schools are using. These are all validated measures, very well researched, but they all give you a different amount of info or different kind of information. They have different investments of time. They have different respondents. So some of these may have respondents where the families also completed, where students completed. There's a whole set of procedures you need to consider around getting information from sources that are not teachers, but lots of information and materials there, including screening protocols to walk you through step by step all the things that we've learned over time through some mistakes and also through the really innovative ideas of educators we've worked with. So we invite you to visit that. The student risk screening scale is one that we have used. Kathleen's used for more than 2 decades, and almost 100,000 students or more that we've conducted research with on this. So a very, very well researched tools that gives really important information about how we can best support kids. So what we know about this is that this takes 15 minutes for a teacher to conduct their class, and it means every teacher has one class of students that they're screening. So 15 minutes to screen your entire school 3 times a year is the investment of time for screening. This particular form, Mark Buckman and some others have done some work to really kind of bring it to life. So it makes it pretty straightforward in terms of all the information, the scores come up, we ensure no items are missed and so forth. But these tools allow us to know where students are starting, where we are as a school, and also they predict really important educational outcomes for students. So we have across all of the age groups, we have information to suggest that it predicts academic outcomes as well as behavioral outcomes for kids, which is super important. Kathleen, anything you wanted to say about this one?
No, and I really appreciate that. And it's been such a gift to get to spend time with Wendy since, like, as you're saying, like since about 2009 when it got expanded. The original 7 items were introduced by a gentleman named Tom Drummond, who's at University of Oregon. And it's been because of people's commitment like yours to looking for not just kids that have acting out issues, but also kids that are really struggling with internalizing. So Wendy is she's under portraying her involvement in this. And I also do want to give a shout out Rebecca Sherrod, previously, now Rebecca Adams. She led a huge project, Project Screen, and we now have many of those articles published on over 72,000 kids in schools that we're first implementing. And so check out those articles to give you additional information and good insight. And then we are, as Wendy mentioned, now have over 100,000 cases of students who we have data on. And we're getting ready to start a whole series of replication studies with people that have been screening in the post-pandemic era and in later stages of implementation. So Wendy, thanks. That was an awesome overview.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And the idea here is that we're moving away from the pressure on teachers to identify when they need to ask for help and concern, but really systematically looking for kids that might need some additional supports to be successful as early as possible. This is the elementary version, and the reason that we also have a secondary version is that the scoring is slightly different. So that looks like this at the elementary level. These are the risk categories. There's not a total score. There are two subscales, as Kathleen said, one for internalizing and one for externalizing, even though we know students might have elevated risk on both of them. And the thing to note really about the middle school and high school is that very low levels of risk actually indicate reason for concern. And so we really want to be making sure that in terms of the internalizing piece that we are conducting these screenings faithfully, we're really looking at those data and supporting kids as quickly as possible. So just a couple ways to look at the data. This is a school level review. So this is an example of externalizing for one school over time. This shows, right, like this commitment to screening. And it allows us in this view to look at how we're doing as a school in terms of implementing Ci3T. It looks like we're doing pretty good, right? We've got about 80% of the kids in green. That's what we expect. We expect there, because of the variance in learners and learner profiles, we expect there to be kids for whom tier one isn't enough, right? And so that's why we have planned in the system to support kids with more targeted supports and those with the most intensive needs. And so this is a way for us to keep track of how we're doing. When we see little dips, right? We have a little dip in green in fall of 2023. Then we want to be looking at our treatment integrity data, be tuning up, making sure that our new teachers are getting the information they need, and making sure that we're implementing with fidelity. This is what it looks like internalizing. You would be looking at both of those. Again, you're looking at patterns over time. That's why we're comparing falls. You'd have a separate graph for winter, separate graph for spring, because we know that behavior changes in patterns, pretty predictable patterns through the year. This is another way to look at using the data. And in this case, we're looking at grade levels. This is really helpful if you are an administrator or a person providing additional supports, a social worker, behavior specialist, BCBA. We know we have a lot of you here tonight on where you think about targeting your resources, right? So it isn't necessarily, we used to talk about how fair isn't equal, right? Fair is everybody gets what they need, and that's what we're looking for here. So here we actually have kind of a balance, kind of a balance of need. But I might say, you know what, we need some extra resources at the kindergarten level because we have 11 kids that are at high risk of for internalizing. That's pretty concerning. We want to get to them as early as possible. So we might mobilize some resources around our kindergarten. So it really helps you with determining where those resources and supports might go. And in addition, you might be looking at the teachers within these grade levels. Do they need more support around professional learning and making sure that they feel fully supported as they are supporting these students? Okay. So, just like we do behavior screening, we also want to do academic screening. So, ideally, you have something around early reading, reading screenings. I know those measures now go through early high school, which is a gift because they didn't used to go past the early years, and now they do. So, they can give us much more information, as well as academic screening in the area of math. Okay, these are some examples. They are available. There are What Works Clearinghouse, National Center for Intensive Interventions, all have resources around academic screenings. But again, similar kind of information in terms of you can see the colors and where kids are and the making decisions. What's really important is we're looking at this information together and with all of the other school data that we collect. So none of these are single indicators that we're making decisions on. We're really looking at the picture of the whole child, just like Ci3T is a whole child approach. Okay. And again, we make the same decisions we would for behavior screening across all three levels, both school-wide, department levels, grade levels, any other ways that you slice and dice the way that adults work in your building around kids, and certainly at the individual student level for those specific tier 2 or tier 3 interventions as needed. Okay. And I think this is really just reiterating what we already talked about, but making sure we're looking at multiple sources of data together. Okay, and then we have some resources that are available to you. These two modules in green, a sort of darker green, you will see on the enhanced page. And these provide all kinds of information about why screening, the purposes of screening, how to conduct it in your schools, how to think about adopting screening measures, and lots of tools to have those conversations with adults in your building as you are adopting and implementing them. So these are modules that you could have people review or refer to who are new to screening, and that can kind of catch them up with where you are. All right. Now we have some time to talk in small groups. So we're going to go into breakout rooms now for the next 10 minutes and talk about potential benefits of screening from your perspective or for your context, any challenges, and then any questions you have. And every room will have a coach, so you'll be able to ask and discuss those answers. Those of you who are doing it, we encourage you to share your experience. That's one of the powers of coming together as a community tonight.
The reason why we spent so much time and we're going to spend time illustrating the student risk screening scale for internalizing and externalizing behavior is not because we think it's the best screening tool in the world, but it is the last of the free access screening tools. So that is important because not everybody has a substantial budget with which to do systematic screening. And before we jump in here, just two quick things, and I'll mention these now and again at the end. Number one, when you look at this, and if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know how we would begin to set it up, I want you to know that there are three different companies that now have licensing agreements to be able to administer the systematic screening. They have a very low cost in doing so at Standard Code, Branching Minds, and ProAct Plus, and we'll mention that again at the end. And secondly, I really want to emphasize what Wendy said just a second ago. Every single kid gets screened at all three time points. So every single kid, general ed, special education, as long as that child's been enrolled 30 days prior to the screening time point, you do it for behavior screening. And if the kid shows up on the first day of school and you haven't had a lot of time with them, you don't need a lot of time with them to do the academic ones. You just want to make sure that you get the information you need to be the superheroes of instruction and use screening data and the three ways we're going to learn about right now. So let's do it.
Yeah, and one thing that came up in our breakout room, Kathleen and I know you can speak to this. Two things we were talking about is teachers are really good judges, right? Like we know that teacher judgment, teacher gut is really important. So trust yourself in this. But also, secondary teachers tend to say, "Do we need two raters? What if they're different in one class and another class?" And studies have shown that really, one rater is enough at the high school level, just like they are at the other levels, and they're highly predictive of end of year outcomes. A little later in the day is actually a little more predictive because that's when our high schoolers are awake, right? First period, they might still be a little bit in their cocoon. So,
Very
um,
good point. And,
okay,
and,
so I
and
just wanted to.
that is a really good point to make too, that Wendy was explaining that she already mentioned earlier, the cut scores are different. And in middle and high schools, it's not every teacher screening every period. You set one period, so like second period or fifth period, and that can be harder than you think it is, because sometimes it can be challenging to pick a period, an instructional period during the day, like second period or fifth period, when all the kids are in the building. So keep that.
And And I do have empathy when that period ends up being for the orchestra teacher or the choir teacher because they have like 100 kids in their class. So also a consideration to look for those that might naturally not be kind of regular class size things as you're choosing your period. All right, so we're going to jump into now you have some data. What is next? And so let's talk about using the data to inform instruction. So we're going to start at tier one, using data to inform instruction. So when we look at this, when we look at these data, this is from the old SIS, the performance screening guide. They actually have one around SEL now, but this was teachers rating students reading, math, pro-social behaviors, and motivation to learn. And where do we need to focus our time and energies and generally in this school? We really need to focus on tier one here because we have about 50% or less of our students who are meeting our benchmarks, our expectations in terms of any one of these areas. So a really strong investment in tier one is going to promote the learning outcomes for those kids that are kind of in that potential tier two zone or that medium moderate risk zone. We also want to make sure, Kathleen says something, and maybe you already said it, Kathleen, or maybe it was in a small group, but you can't tier two your way out of low fidelity tier one, meaning you cannot provide tier two interventions for this number of students because you are not supporting your tier one efforts most intentionally. So really that's one thing, one reason that you're looking at your data as a school to really understand where your focus is and also reestablish purpose. Where are we headed? How are we doing? What resources might we need to better support our teachers for kids to meet those goals? This is another indicator. In this one, what I'd like to know is what grade level should we be sending some extra supports to? Third grade is looking a little rough, fifth grade also, right? And so again, what we're looking at is we want to get as close to that 80% of students in the green. And we know that with high fidelity practices, we actually can achieve that. All right. So one of the things in an integrated model is thinking about how we integrate the learning across. We want to be most efficient. So we're not just going to think about let's teach social skills and then put that back on the shelf and now pull out reading and reading is over and let's get math, right? And oh yeah, we'll do some behavioral training, behavioral lessons once a week. We really need to be doing those things and bringing them all together so that they have the most benefit for kids. We talk about teaching and offering opportunities for practice and giving feedback all of the time. That makes sense for social skills and it makes sense for expected behaviors, as well as it does for academics. So, one of the things that we did many years ago now, I don't know where the time goes, but many years ago now, is created what we call a integrated lesson plan. And let me show you how all of these pieces come together. Okay, here they are. Okay. And this is just a template, right? This is kind of a traditional approach that you'll see to a lesson plan. It is available to you. It's downloadable, editable. And so we're not saying this is the lesson plan you should use. We're really providing a framework for you to think about all three of those learning areas for students at the same time. And one of the ways that we can set the stage for that is when we are planning our academic, we might be starting with our academic target or objective or standard. And then we want to think about, as we're planning a lesson for our students to engage in this kind of learning opportunity, what are the social skills that we've taught that we might want to be supporting, reinforcing, offering opportunities for practice and feedback during this lesson? What are those social skills that are going to help them best engage in this learning with us? And also, what are the behavioral expectations already clearly defined on your matrix do they need in order to engage in this lesson? Or which ones do they need practice on that we might want to bring as a highlight for this? And so we're going to be thinking about objectives in terms of all three of those things and bringing them into every aspect of the lesson, even down to, I would say, for new teachers or teachers new to things like behavior specific praise, right? And how we're going to promote those behavioral expectations, writing actual examples of what you would say and how you could say it, actually writing examples of connections with your social skills curriculum in there so that you have really tangible ways of bringing that in there and that it's not an afterthought and that you don't forget to do it. We also, in this lesson plan, really specifically and intentionally plan for all of the low intensity strategies. I'm not going to go into those because I know Rebecca is. But how do we bring in those strategies across the lesson plan so that we are able to both provide some prompts, opportunities, and reinforcement, and we're really intentional about the integration across those spaces. On this lesson plan, and something we would always encourage you to do is think about, we've framed it here as a teacher reflection. It's a bit of a treatment integrity tool, right? Am I using this? How confident do I feel in using this? And what kind of support might I need to reach out to gain more understanding? I actually worked with a teacher one time, and there was an item on the treatment fidelity form that every day she would circle no. And then finally, she was like, I circle no every day, but I'm not really sure what this actually is. And it provided a conversation for us to say, oh, let me show you what that is, right? And so that can be useful for this too. I see pre-correction on there. I don't really know what pre-correction is. And then you can connect them with a resource to actually support them in learning that. So they're not just always saying no, but they actually have some background and examples and an opportunity to try that out in their classroom. All right, we are going to watch this wonderful. This is Allison Bernard sharing some information about this.
In this example of integrating academic, behavior, and social domains, the teacher begins the lesson design with a specific behavior in mind. The teacher examines office discipline data and determines students need more practice opportunities to be respectful. One of the school-wide expectations he chooses is the social skill, listen to others' ideas, that was recently taught and designed an integrated physics lesson. He decides to have the students present ideas they have been learning about in a fun application activity. First, the students design a plan for how to use 12 pieces of uncooked linguine and 6 inches of masking tape to balance a ping pong ball on top of the linguine, with the stipulation the masking tape could not be attached to the ball. Students present their plan while their peers practice listening respectfully, asking questions respectfully, and the plan designers respond respectfully to their questions. They then gather in groups to test the different models in their group and select the best plan to represent their group in a class demonstration. You can see there are many opportunities for students to practice the expectation, be respectful, when listening to the ideas of others in this physics activity. The teacher uses pre-correction to make students aware of the expected behaviors, then active supervision and instructional feedback to guide students toward meeting the academic objectives and expected behaviors, as well as using the social skill. For more information, please visit ci3t.org.
Yeah, it's really nice. Allie has presented that in a really nice, concise way. That video is available in the module for you to be able to use. So if you want to start to have this conversation in your own context, we would invite you to use that to kick it off. But hopefully that provided just a nice example for how the importance of and how we can bring in both behavioral expectations and social skills into our academic curriculum. All right, so now if you would answer one of these two questions in the chat, we find that sharing information and ideas with each other is really powerful. You're out there doing the work every single day, doing the good deeds with kids. So if you would answer one of these, right, one way that you could integrate social skills or behavioral objectives into a lesson, it might be something you've done, something you thought of, something you've seen, or low intensity strategies. How might you think about using those? So we would encourage you just to keep dropping in ideas because they're inspiring for others. And then we have a module connection. So you will find the embedding and integrating Ci3T domains into daily instruction. And one of you mentioned in the chat about making groupings, using groupings, and that's when you can be using your screening data. You can be using both your behavioral and academic data for balancing groups, for supporting kids to partner together and work together to make sure you're providing appropriate practice and also having good models for each other. We have to remember that all kids bring strengths in different areas, and so we want to make sure that we're leveraging kids' strengths and offering opportunities for them to grow in other areas. But lots of good videos that can kick off this. We actually have three videos that show examples at different stages, different topics, different academic areas. We have some sample lesson plans, and these we have shared with schools who just want a model to kind of start to think about this, and then download these, make these your own, edit them for your own context for sure. Okay. And we invite you to join us for the next Project Empower, where we're actually going to go more deeply into integrated lesson plans. So we'll explore some of those additional resources and examples and conversation. Okay, so the first part of that was the prevent side, right? We're thinking about what can we do to get in front of potential behavioral challenges, to really meet kids where they are academically and socially, and allow them those opportunities to grow, always taking an instructional approach. But we also have a responding to challenging behavior. And we're moving away from those really traditional approaches. Not that we don't have, still the traditional kinds of things when kids misbehave in schools. However, we want to shift the way that we are responding to challenging behavior in a way that's instructive and that decreases those behaviors from escalating, as opposed to kind of making them worse, which I hate to say, but is easy for us to do when we feel like we're being disrespected or challenged. And so in order to do that, we take what Allison always so well describes as our 6-step instructional approach. So a 6-step instructional approach allows us very explicit steps that we can do when there is some challenging behavior in the classroom, so that we can maintain a positive learning environment and a safe learning environment for all kids, and that we're providing that redirection, reprompting, and so forth for kids. So let's look at what that is. The nice thing about this is once you have this in place as part of your practice, your students will be expecting you to use it. So consistency in this approach is really important. And I think it shows we always have show respect and be respectful as one of the expectations for our students. We also want to be modeling and showing that. So in terms of responding to challenging behavior, the first step is to show empathy. So we're going to make sure that we always see them coming in with this challenge or with this concern or need, and we're going to respond to it with empathy first, right? And then we also want to make sure that all of the kids feel safe and that we're moving forward, and that they know that we as the adult in the class have our hand on it, and we're going to be supporting them or others who might be having a hard day. And so we keep instruction moving forward. We acknowledge students that are doing those expected behaviors, because we want to teach all kids the first way to get my attention is by doing the behaviors that are expected in our classroom. And then we want to go back and make sure that we're checking in with that student. We're giving them some tasks that they can do to get them started, to re-engage them in the learning environment, clarifying the expectation, moving away and allowing them time and space. We sometimes hover a little too much, which I don't think is usually a good thing when a kid needs a couple of minutes to take a breath and recalibrate or let something go that they brought in with them and re-engage in our class, which is really what we're trying to go for. And then once we give them some space, we again recognize students who are doing those expectations. But as soon as that student gets back on track and is meeting your expectations again, and they've re-engaged with learning, please recognize that. I think one of the most heartbreaking things used to be for me as a special education teacher was to work so hard with a kid to learn how to raise his hand and wait to be called on. And then you put him in a classroom and he does it and no one calls on him, right? So please recognize when that student is engaged back on expectation, something yet you can recognize and get them back on track with some positive feedback to encourage them to continue to move forward. All right. This entire process is part of the 6-step instructional approach for responding to challenging behavior. Absolutely something that should be in the toolkit of every single educator or person that engages with students. So especially for teachers who have maybe higher levels of screening data for kids at higher levels of risk, this is a really good place to give them this tool to be able to support those kids and also feel like they're making a difference and create that inclusive, warm learning environment in their classrooms. Okay, and we invite you to come and join more or learn more about the 6-step instructional approach for responding to challenging behavior in February. So those of you who are not frozen under in February, please come and join us. Or if you are frozen under, you can come and join us because you'll be available. All right. I am going to pass this over to Rebecca.
So we're going to keep that conversation going in terms of tier 1 shifts that we can think about making when we're looking at screening data. And I'm going to just dip a toe into some of these low intensity strategies. And in the chat, people had some really great examples of what those could be. So there's already some good familiarity with them. So we're just taking a quick peek, and then there'll be an opportunity if you want to go a little bit deeper in our next breakout room to look at what some of these are more specifically. But in the spirit of looking at data and keeping data at the forefront, if you were a classroom teacher or you're working with classroom teachers and you are looking at either those beautiful graphs that we had at the beginning, or maybe yours looks like this beautiful table here, you want to look down at the breakdown of students that are falling into that low, moderate, or high risk. And if, as we've been talking about before, you have a good chunk of students, right? We're thinking less than 80% in that low category, more than 15, more than 5 in that high risk. A great place to start is at tier 1, because if you make a shift at tier 1, what that means is that every kid in that classroom will be impacted by that shift. So it's like a really good bang for your buck type deal. And if you're at a school that's implementing Ci3T, you have this implementation manual, and you probably, most definitely, in your roles and responsibilities section for faculty and staff in the academic section, you probably have something that's like use low intensity strategies, and it lists them all out because the goal is to maximize engagement and minimize disruption. And so low intensity strategies are a great way to do that. And we've talked a little bit about these modules. So we actually have one for each of the 7 low intensity strategies. I'm going to just very briefly essentially say their names so that you know, maybe you're like, oh yeah, I knew that. But this is what we're talking about when we talk about these low intensity strategies that teachers can use in their classroom. So active supervision, you're intentionally moving around your classroom, you're interacting with students, you're praising when they're on task, and you're maybe redirecting as needed. So that's one of them. Behavior specific praise, we know it, we love it, but it's being, again, intentional about how you're praising students. So not just saying good job, but really saying what they did. There are so many instances in which you can be so sure that that student knew what you were praising them for, and who knows what's happening in kids' brains, right? They're like, oh, my teacher just said good job. Like, I've just been thinking about that cartoon that I watched all morning. I guess they want me to keep doing that instead of engaging in math, right? So if you're really clear about what you're praising them on, there's no guessing what behavior you want to see again. High probability request sequence, we call high Ps. This is a really great way of increasing the likelihood that a student is going to complete a task that might not be preferred. So the short story is that you give a couple high probability requests for them to do, and then you follow that really quickly with the one they're less likely to engage in. So take out your pencil, get a sheet of paper, write your name on it, and now start your independent work. It kind of capitalizes on that behavioral momentum to really get students moving and grooving. Instructional choice, we love that one. Saw that one in the chat, but it's just thinking intentionally about where can students choose what they're doing and offering them the choice, and then making sure that that choice is being honored when it's provided. Instructional feedback is just being really intentional about feedback on students' performance. So thinking specifically about maybe clarifying some misunderstanding or confirming things that are going well. Opportunities to respond within a specific time frame. You are allowing students time to show you that they can respond to these questions. It's great for reviews, but it's things like those response cards, the whiteboards, but you're giving students an opportunity to engage in what you're doing, and not just one student, but every student in the classroom. And I should have told you to buckle your seatbelts before we started this because I'm going so fast. But again, there'll be time to dive in. Pre-correction is probably my all-time favorite low intensity strategy. And essentially it's letting kids know what you're looking for ahead of time. And then when you're in that situation, acknowledging them for doing it, ideally with behavior specific praise. So a lot of these pair really nicely together. And they're all shifts that you can make in your classroom, or you can help educators make in their classroom, that have really positive impacts for students. And the great news is a lot of them pair really well together, so you can get even more bang for your buck. The modules that we talked about have all kinds of different materials that are available to support you in using these strategies. And the other resource that we wanted to highlight as we're thinking about Tier 1 shifts is this What Works Clearinghouse practice guide. We can throw the link in the chat for you about this, but it goes over these strategies that can take place at Tier 1 to really support students and support teachers with really high quality instruction. And because we love you all so much and we want you to come back, we are talking specifically about some of these low intensity strategies and an upcoming Empower. So if you're like, let's dive into it, this is a great place to come back, and we'll talk specifically about how you implement these strategies and what that looks like. So what we're going to do is take 10 of these 15 minutes in a breakout room to explore whatever you are feeling right now.
All right, so we've spent some time thinking about when we get our screening data, how are we using these data? We can use it to inform our Tier 1 instruction, like Wendy walked us through. We can use it to empower teachers with those low intensity strategies like Rebecca spoke to. And the third way we can use the data is to connect students to those validated Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. And that's what I'm going to walk us through briefly. So When we're working in a Ci3T model and we're making decisions about how to connect students with supports, we're going to start by opening up our Ci3T implementation manual, and we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom to where those tier 2, the secondary intervention grids are, and the tier 3 tertiary intervention grids are. We're going to locate our school-wide data. So thinking about that screening data, academic and behavioral, like office discipline referrals, attendance, nurse visits, all of those pieces of data you have at your disposal that give us an indicator of how students are doing. And then the documents that you're going to use to capture the decisions that are made and those next steps. And it's kind of this like predictable cadence of work where we look at what are some of the options we have available, what is our data telling us, and what decisions are we making for how to connect students to those supports. And the way that that looks in your manual, so if you open up your manual, you'll have these in here. And if you don't have a manual, that's okay. We're just going to talk through in a Ci3T model. Here's how we organize this information. This is an example of a grid, an intervention grid. And this has a couple of features that we just want to point out. So first up is the name of that support. So this is self-monitoring. This might be small group social skills intervention or small group reading instruction. But what is the intervention? It's not a person, it's the service, the intervention being delivered. Then there's a brief description of what that is. And this is written in a really clear and simple and concise way that we would be able to share with families, with community members, with educators across our buildings. This is just our way of transparently saying this is the intervention that's available and this is what it is. And then we think about entry criteria. So this column here is telling us for whom might this be a good fit for. So for example, this is a self-monitoring intervention. We're saying this might be a good fit for a student who has moderate levels of risk on the SRSSIE for externalizing. That E7, E is for externalizing, I5, the I is for internalizing. It might be a good fit for students who are at high risk for externalizing or internalizing, or for students who have 2 or more office discipline referrals. And then we're also looking at that academic data. Is there a need there? So the entry criteria is just giving you an idea of who might this be a good fit for. Then we've got the data that we're going to progress monitor. So we're always going to be looking at 3 types of data. One, we're looking at that student outcome piece. So if we're tracking behavior, if we're tracking an academic metric, but that piece that we're trying to move the needle on, we're going to be looking at that. Then we're also going to be looking at social validity, and that's what do the people involved, so the educator, the student, and the family, what do they think about the goals? Are these goals socially significant? What do they think about the procedures? Are these acceptable? Is this feasible? And are the outcomes meaningful? Like if the student met the goals that we set, would that be a meaningful change in their experience at school, in their experience as a learner? Is this really going to be something that's going to help them? And we want to make sure that we understand this before we start an intervention and that we also look at it at the end. But we want to know before, because if a student's telling you, like, I am not going to do self-monitoring. I will not have that form on my desk. That is super embarrassing. Absolutely not. I'm not doing it. Guess what? They're definitely not going to do it. And the intervention's probably not going to work. So we want to take a minute before we start to say, what do you think about this? Do we think this is going to work? Does this feel like a good fit? And then we're going to look at treatment integrity. And that just means, is the intervention in place as intended? So if we said we're going to give this out at the beginning of the math lesson, it's just like a little check of, did I hand out the sheet at the beginning of the math lesson? Did I check in with the student? It's not a gotcha. It's just to say, these are the parts of the intervention and how is this going? Am I able to do these things consistently? And if not, that's okay. We can make some shifts to make that happen, because we can't decide if an intervention is working if we don't know if it's happening consistently. And then finally, we've got exit criteria. How do we know when a student is ready to graduate from this intervention? Either because they have met the goals and they're ready to help us fade that, or they've not yet met those goals and we need to maybe intensify the intervention or try something different. So as Kathleen talked us through earlier, we're going to be thinking about this both at tier 2, which is for students who tier 1 is just not yet sufficient, and that is totally expected. So we're thinking about like 15-ish% of students, and you're going to see a variety of options. It might be something like, here's an example for recognize, relax, record. This is an intervention for 3rd through 5th grade students who are experiencing like anxious feelings, and it teaches them how to recognize those feelings in their body, a couple different strategies for how to manage those emotions, and it gets them to like record or self-monitor their use of those strategies, their engagement, and their anxious feelings. So this is something that we are really excited to share more about. This is something that might be interesting to you. Maybe you have some students in your class who have that moderate or high risk for internalizing behaviors. We would love to see you in March. We're going to do a much deeper dive, or not a much deeper, a deep dive, because it's the whole session's about, is thinking about this intervention. We would love to share that with you. And similarly, we're going to see interventions that are happening at tier 3. Usually this list of interventions, kind of your menu of what's offered, is usually a little bit shorter because they're pretty intensive. You don't need a lot of tier 3 interventions, you just need a few that are very likely to work. So one that we often see is functional assessment-based intervention. That is an intensive intervention that helps you figure out the function, like why is this behavior happening, and then build an aligned intervention. And if that's something that you'd be interested in learning more about, we're going to be talking about that in April, and we would love to see you there. So when you're thinking about selecting an intervention, you might notice like, man, the entry criteria for these are really similar. Like the student meets criteria for behavior contracts and DBR and self-monitoring. Like, how do I pick? And we'd encourage you to, when you're trying to make that decision, to be thinking about collaborating with the family and the student and the educator to think about what's a good fit, thinking about what you know about the student, what are their strengths, what do they like, thinking about function of the behavior. So if we know that a student is really motivated by adult attention, check in, check out might be a great fit because that gives them this predictable opportunity to connect with a preferred adult. That's a great fit. That might not be as effective for a student who's actually being motivated by trying to escape a sensory experience or who's trying to access a preferred activity. It might not be as good of a match. Might still work, but might not be as good of a match. And then also think about your own strengths. What are you really excited about? What have you done previously? Do you have a coach who could jump in to support you who has expertise in one of these? So really thinking about the resources around you. And then of course, again, we want to make those adjustments based on social validity. So if a student says, absolutely not, do not put that form on my desk, maybe self-monitoring isn't what you want to do. Maybe you want to shift to a different approach. I'm now going to walk us through an example of what this could look like. So I have 2 resources open right now. And if this is something that is interesting to you, there's an opportunity to practice this like more in the next breakout room. But one thing you can do is there's a data dashboard, and this here is sample data. So these are not real students with real data, but this is kind of representative of what is typically seen. This is second grade data. And what you're looking at are the students and then different types of school-wide data that would be available. So days missed, tardies, nurse visits, office discipline referrals, and then the screening behavior data and screening academic data. And we're going to follow that process where we think about what's in our manual, think about what our data is telling us, and then make some decisions. So what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to sort for students who have moderate risk for externalizing behavior. So that's kind of that acting out, disruptive, those outward behaviors. I'm looking for moderate, and I know those kids are color-coded yellow here. So I filtered for that. And now I'm going to look for reading. I'm curious, do any of these students have some like co-occurring reading challenges? And I'm noticing right away that every single one of these students who's having some challenges with externalizing behavior, except for this one kiddo, is also having challenges with oral reading fluency. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm going to be looking for an intervention that's going to meet both of these needs. Now, before I make any decisions, I do want to look at attendance. And that's really important because if a student is not a regular attender, if they're not regularly at school, they're unlikely to benefit from the intervention. So I might want to decide that I want to intervene first on attendance and how do I help that student attend school more regularly before I double down on like a tier 2 or a tier 3 intervention. So when I look at my days missed, I'm noticing that James is at 5. That's a little bit high for this time of the school year. It's early October. 5 absences is a little bit high. So I might say, you know what, I'm actually going to get curious. I'm going to connect with James's family and maybe see what's going on there and how I can support getting his regular attendance up. He also has like a lot of tardies. So instead of focusing on a tier 2 intervention, I'm going to focus on attendance first. But for Carl, Sue, and Lily, their attendance is pretty in range. So no big flags there. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to my manual. So I have a sample one from our website up. So if you're at a school that does not use Ci3T, we would be happy to share an example with you that you can just use for this practice opportunity. And I'm going to scroll down till I get to the grids. So don't get dizzy, but here I go. And I'm just scrolling until I get to my grids. They're at the very bottom. I'm close. There we go. I know I got there when I have my assessment schedule and it's right underneath. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll. And I'm looking for the entry criteria that's telling me a student would be at moderate risk for externalizing and have some risk for reading. Specifically, reading fluency was what that was looking at. Because a lot of these kids actually have a lot of strength and comprehension. So I'm looking specifically for oral reading fluency. So phonemic awareness, I'm looking for reading fluency. I'm good there. Phonics, their phonics data was looking okay, so I'm still going to go. Oh, here's a fluency one. Okay, so this could be a good option. That's going to meet that academic need. Vocabulary, that's not what I'm looking for. Reading comprehension, they were good there. Repeated reading, that could be an option. And then I keep going. Oh, and now I'm in writing. So I'm going to keep scrolling. Math, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, self-monitoring. Here I go. Moderate risk. Okay. Oh, and maybe here some need for academic support. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe self-monitoring might be a good fit. So then I would continue this process. I'm going to keep scrolling down and I'm looking through my criteria until I find some different options that I can decide, is that a good fit? Is that a good fit for what I know about students and what they need? So if this is something that you're interested in learning more about, we would love to share. There's 2 modules where you can kind of dive in more deeply. So we've got this great module on Tier 2, and this goes over the Tier 2 process. This video right here is broken down into these little chunks. So each of those circles is a little chunk. It's like a 5-minute video of actually going through the data dashboard. So it's it's a principal walking through that sample data and saying like, here's how I would interpret that. Here's what I would do. There's a simulation, which is really helpful. So you can actually go through the data and say, I want to look at this. I want to look at this. This is what I would do. And then we do offer a few different tools that you could personalize for use for how you could keep track of what are the interventions that are in place. And then similarly, we have that same information for Tier 3. So there's some great infographics and videos in there that help orient you to like, what is Tier 3, some common misconceptions, that video walkthrough of looking at data and how do I make sense of this and how might I use this to connect kids to supports. And then some more examples here are some tools. They're the same tools as the Tier 2 module, but it's just showing you here's how you use this at Tier 3. So with that, we're going to give you another 10 minutes and invite you to choose from a couple different options. So you can choose to go explore that Tier 2 module, you could choose to explore the Tier 3 module, or you could choose to do some more practice of using that spreadsheet to connect students with some supports.
As we mentioned at the very beginning, this is one of our favorite topics, and we've left some time right now because we want to put a bow on some of these things that have come up in some of the conversations and come in the breakout rooms. And you might think, I want to learn a little bit more about what I can do with the screening. The whole series shows how to use screening in integrated tier systems such as Ci3T to connect kids to supports, inform instruction, and inform PD. I'm also hopeful that some of you that already have screening data, and shout out to all of you, I won't embarrass you, but many of you are here tonight as first-time screeners. So you've got a range of experience, but take time to look at the data and start to think about how that can be used. And no shame. If you're thinking like, oh, sweet mother of Jesus, like I think I did this all wrong, that's okay. Email us. We've got trainer and coaches calls. You can pop in, you can get additional information, but please consider giving yourself an action item. And as you've seen, Rebecca and Wendy and Elise all night tonight, they've been showing you how all these things feed into the next things that are coming. So screening is your through line. So these are going to be the data that help to drive the entire experience you're going to provide to students. And if you're thinking, ooh, I want to continue the conversation, we do have another trainer and coaches call coming up on November 5th. So November 5th, we will come together again. And if you want information before then, will somebody pop my cell phone in the chat? You can always call or text and I'll get back to you right away. So thank you so much for the gift of your time. We appreciate you being here. And again, Elise, thank you for planning this wonderful evening. Thanks to people that presented and thanks to all the coaches that came here tonight. And especially thanks to Stacy for organizing this and always being so gracious. She's just like so calm on the outside while kicking like crazy underneath. And thank you mostly to each of you for sharing the gift of your time and coming with us. We are here committed to the mission of this work to make sure that we